I'm going to get started. Welcome. I'm going to talk today about SBOM. If you look at the title of my talk, government regulations are in there. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have about 20 years in technology and technology leadership. And I'm going to put it out there at the very beginning. I'm not an expert on government regulations. So it may seem weird that it's in the title of my talk. I think as we go through this material, everyone will understand that there's some common sense topics in here. We'll all understand why this is important. And that begins with the landscape of software development today. Whether you're making some proprietary tool or you have an open source project for fun, open source code is everywhere. This is from GitHub's 2022 Octaverse report. And when I was coming into the industry, Steve Ballmer from Microsoft was extremely anti-open source. That has changed. Even Microsoft open sources the .NET framework. So open source is everywhere, and I can change this slide for whatever industry I'm talking at. If it's finance, there's headlines. If it's real estate, there's headlines. If it's healthcare, there's headlines. Open source is everywhere in healthcare. So what's the problem? What's the problem with open source? Well, this one people don't tend to think about it at first. It doesn't seem as scary, but there's legal risk. When you are using an open source product, you're complying with particular license terms. So surely you've heard of VMware. If you're a nerd, some of these database technologies in the middle you might have heard of. The purpose is to bring your attention to it because whether VMware was the plaintiff or the defendant, someone spent a bunch of work tearing out code they weren't supposed to be using because they violated a license. That's cost, unplanned work. So it should be considered. But I think the big one people think about are vulnerabilities. So last year there was over 26,000 new CVEs. That's just the name for an identifier for a software vulnerability. That's 3 an hour. So every 20 minutes there's a new CVE on average. Log4j is a very well-known one. If you're in the tech industry, if you're in any IT, you surely dealt with this in December of 2021. And then I put some more specific ones, things people may not think of. These, the little toxic symbol there on the right. An open source maintainer that created these two libraries intentionally corrupted their libraries to make a point, and it would DOS your application if you were including it. So most people that used Node, something like 70% were using one of these. So you need to be paying attention to what you're using, whether it's Log4j or just some random color library you found on the internet. This one's well known, and I think it needs to be invoked because they're right down their expense for this breach from 2017 to 2019 was $1.4 billion. I'm sure today it's cost them over $2 billion. And I have a little bit of empathy because I used to work at a software company and maintained a gigantic legacy application. And it's not easy to quickly fix these things. But this was a highest severity vulnerability. And they found out about it a couple of months before they were exploited. So these are things you need to be on top of, and you need to be able to respond to immediately when something new is announced. And you may think, well, that's kind of old news. Okay, haven't we learned from this? I'm going to actually go back even older, to the 80s. When I was a software engineering student, we had to study this. It was a case study that was taught to us because this device, this radiation device, maimed and killed a number of people because of software defects. Well, what does that have to do with Equifax? It has to do with, one, paying attention to what you're building, but more learning from your mistakes. Don't repeat yourself as a programming principle. I think it applies to a lot of things in business or other tragedies, the Challenger disaster. These are all common in that they came about because of hubris, lack of process control, thinking, oh, this won't happen. This is serious stuff. So what can we do about it? Well, like any complicated problem, there's lots of ways, there's lots of tools you need for the correct solution, but SBOM is a big part of it. And if you haven't heard this term before, an SBOM is essentially all of the dependencies, vulnerabilities, and license information you know about your software. So let's break that down. Let's give you something that makes it really easy to remember SBOM. And when you're talking about this later, because I'm sure you will be, this is a story that you can tell to tell the rest of the people in your team about SBOM and why it's important. So let's say I want to make a drink. And I'm going to make a Manhattan. So there's some booze, there's some bitters, and you have to have a garnish, right? You're going to have the cherry, or it doesn't look right. It's not the same. And I have a great business idea. Canned spirits, canned cocktails are big now, right? So I want to sell this to Anheuser-Busch. There it is. This is my invention. But before Anheuser-Busch puts that on the shelf, or maybe in a 30-pack, because I bet the Nashville Predators would want to sell this, right? What do I need to tell them? What's going to have to be on the package? Well, the list of ingredients, right? We need to say what's in this thing. And you might think, well, that's easy. There's the list of ingredients right there. You already know it. Well, you'd be wrong. Because there are sub-ingredients in some of those things we're using, right? That maraschino cherry, fun fact, somebody actually did a college study. It was about 40 pages. I got to find all the ingredients commonly found in commercial maraschino cherries. But that drink recipe did not say potassium sorbate or red number 40. There's a number of things in that product that you haven't disclosed if you just used the top level ingredients list. And you probably can see where I'm going with this. So how do we track that? Well, you need an F-bomb. Not that kind of F-bomb. A food bill of materials, right? You would think of this would be the nutrition facts label. But you need to tell your clients if there's anything dangerous in your product, potentially. And what are all those things? Maybe they have a nut allergy. Maybe they have a shellfish allergy. Those sub-ingredients, you got to list them all. And then where is it from? What's the country of origin? It's not for retail sale. That stuff is always going to be on that facts label. What's the equivalent for software? So here we are. We've kind of completed the analogy. So the software bill of materials, you'll see that I didn't change the text from the F-bomb to the S-bomb. It's the same purpose. You need a full and accurate disclosure of what's in your product, including the things you know to be dangerous. In this case, it's not shellfish. It's not peanuts. It's those CVEs. It's the vulnerabilities. So we need to tell the consumer of our SBOM that there's known vulnerabilities with our product. We need to tell them all the sub-ingredients, which in the software world we call transitive dependencies. And we need to tell them that other information, like what licenses does this rely on? What license am I agreeing to by using this in my organization? Does it mean I'm going to have to also open source my code? That's a real concern. So how does an SBOM specifically help me? Well, first of all, you're going to have to make one. Whether or not that means anything is to be determined. But regulations are continuing to be written that will require you to create an SBOM. The executive order was a big thing in 2021. Most recently, I've heard this mentioned in a couple of talks. Section 3305, that omnibus bill, just signed in December of 2022. It's going to require you to provide an SBOM for pre-market approval for medical devices. And in every industry, there are regulations that will compel people to properly document and disclose that transparency aspect. So do you think the FDA remembers Therac 25, the device I mentioned earlier that was a terrible tragedy? Every industry will have their reasons for requiring this. The other way it helps you is just as part of business practice, planning what work are you going to do? How do you collect SBOMs from your vendors? How do you make them for the software you create? You need to be able to build manage and monitor all of the software in your organization that you are responsible for. You need to be alerted when there's new vulnerabilities. I mentioned Log4j in the beginning. Imagine you were trying to find that manually. You can't do it. I was at a developer conference a few weeks ago talking to some people on the floor that had to actually find Log4j manually. These dependency trees are huge. They said it took them weeks with a team of 5 just to find all those instances. So you need a tool. If I were to write an application and use this, I went and just found the Simple Spring Web project. I wanted to do a Java web project. I didn't write a single line of code, yet I already had 63 dependencies that I'm now putting in my application, that I'm responsible for, that I should be monitoring for vulnerabilities and making sure that I'm at the latest version and knowing what that affects. So I'm going to close with a quote. A big convention last year, one of the speakers gave a talk, and they used the Log4j example. And they said, within hours, we were able to find all 953 locations where we were using Log4j. That's the sort of power you can expect when you've created an SBOM, because you've done the legwork. You know, the SBOM is the destination. Well, it's the journey that's going to help your business. When you have the tools and the capabilities in place, this stuff becomes very, very simple. And I'm happy to today announce, this press release just went out this morning, that there is a public resource now available with 54 million SBOMs that anyone can go to. I like to say it's the IMDb of SBOMs. There's no like Siskel and Ebert ratings on there yet, but you can go to this page for any open source package you use, and you can download an SBOM. And there's great tools that can help you manage these. So why are government regulations going to make you create an SBOM for transparency and accountability? I think it speaks for itself. Thank you.
We're all running these tools on devices in-house and things like that now, but more and more stuff is moving to the cloud, and software gets changed and updated in the cloud, and we don't often know. So what's the solution to the stuff you're running that you got the SBOM when you bought it, and that's how it was then, but 3 months later, it's not the same SBOM?
You're right. The minute they send it to you, it's, you know, whoever's providing that service has a fiduciary responsibility, in my opinion, to continuously provide you updated SBOMs. And the format of an SBOM is such that it's machine readable. All of that can be, through basic technology, integrated into whatever your tooling is. So if your cloud provider gives you an SBOM when you first buy it, you should be able to get an updated one at any time. To me, that's their responsibility. I think I've been asked probably 6 times at this show so far, well, what about these businesses we work with who won't give us an SBOM? At some point, a lot of these big companies that buy these products are the ones that are going to make them provide it. When they say, we're not buying this until you give me an SBOM, that's when it starts to change. There's a good draft document by CISA, which is specifically for procurement departments, and it outlines how to demand an SBOM from a vendor. And it even, the second page of the document is, here's how you beat them down until you get it. Price, schedule. This is coming from the cybersecurity arm of the government. So I think nothing does change until the people that are buying this stuff say, part of the deal is I want that document of what's in here, and when things change, I want you to provide me a new one, or some of these tools will do that for you. So you only need to get it once, and as long as the composition of that product doesn't change, the tool can tell you when there's new vulnerabilities. So there are vendors, we're one, that can do that.
So part two of the question is that that's interesting. For example, I was a CIO that moved, they had biomedical engineering moved under me. But all the clinical engineering devices, all those notifications went to someone in clinical engineering. And those people didn't share with the security team or the network team or any of the people they should be. So how do you get around that one outside of firing your people who don't do their jobs right?
You do both. You fire those people. And these tools are very easy to integrate. It's just a text document. We integrate with things like Vanta for more traditional compliance. You're doing SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI. Some security operations center needs a dashboard where they can see that. Often for compliance, it's because you have a time limit. You have 30 days to remediate all critical and high vulnerabilities. There needs to be that data flowing into an overarching dashboard, but it's fundamentally pretty easy to do. As long as somebody is the CISO or whomever is saying, when it comes to vulnerability information, that has to go not stopping at the top of a sub-organization. It needs to flow to the very top.
And one more kind of weird question. A lot of healthcare providers are so small they don't have their own SOC or it's outsourced or managed service provider. Would you integrate your tool into a managed service for a customer?
Our business personally, we tend to work with MSSPs who manage this on behalf of their clients. So they may use our retail product, but we also sell the API capabilities, so it could be pumped into whatever. You have a special need or you want to integrate it into some more niche product, someone could do that very easily for you. Yep. Thank you.